So, Eamon, the Criminal Assets Bureau was it was being sort of kicked around the dole this week about sort of upgrading legislation as such, which has proved to be very good legislation brought in 1996, but they're hoping to make it more efficient. The Justice Minister, Jim O'Callaghan, is talking about bringing a review of the original act that has been in place. But ultimately, they're really trying to make it more efficient, are they?
Yeah, well, the main thing they want is to reduce the amount of time before disposal orders can be made on property that's been seized. So that at the moment it's up to 7 years.
So literally, a property would have to sit there for 7 years after it's.
They have done now. That is still happening. We're seeing cases from whenever it is from 2018 and 2017 coming before the courts. Even this month, we had a couple of them, and. But at the same time, there's other cases going through that are newer ones where they've been dealt with much quicker. So it seems to be, it depends on.
Are they on settlement or what?
No, if it settles, they're done quite quickly.
Yeah.
But if they're contested, less so. And then if somebody, they may not. Or they may not entirely contest the original case, but then may contest the actual possession. Come to it a bit late, saying, "Well, it is the proceeds of crime, but I got my collection of rare chickens, or I have a family, or whatever it is." They'll come up with some reason why they shouldn't be allowed. So that goes through the kind of the appeal system, and then it goes back if it's won or lost. It goes back to the cab hearings again.
Yeah.
And then it's argued if the appeal was won, and then there's maybe another decision made where there's given a stay and to leave it along. So we've seen a number of cases where, in some cases, a stay is given. And I suppose the Judge Alexander
Owens, to break it down, the point of the Criminal Assets Bureau and the Proceeds of Crime Act when it was created was that the state could go after the ill-gotten gains, essentially, of the criminals. But it wasn't up to the state to prove that the assets, be they a house, a pair of runners, cash, whatever it was, were actually the proceeds of crime. It was up to the defendant to prove that they had legitimately earned the money in order to buy it. And that was the beauty of this legislation. And it was spoken about across the world, really, as being this, blueprint for other countries. But in order to, I suppose, bring through such draconian legislation at the time, there was a clause put in it that person, the defendant, has up to 7 years, essentially, to prove, be it through appeals or through all various ways through the courts, that actually that's mine, and it, I've earned the money to get that.
Yeah, or there's a proportion of it is mine.
Yes.
And so what the kind of, and this is something I think some of the CAB officials have pushed forward themselves, is to reduce the amount of time, and because it's all about depriving, a suspected criminal or an actual criminal of the benefit of enjoying the fruits of their illegal labours. So,
but to say if that's a house, right, that's being contested, do they get the full 7 years to live in that after sort of, the proceedings start?
No, not necessarily. And I mean, and there's been plenty of examples of it recently where, they've come back within a relatively short space of time and got their kind of, they've appointed a receiver and then, taken possession, and they'll agree a time and place and date. There's plenty of high profile cases where we've seen that, and then they go on the market and they're sold.
And is that if it's settled?
No, that's even when they have been contested.
Right.
And they've gone through their appeals and they've lost their appeals, and then there's nothing in the way then for the CAB. So that's
happened within 3 years rather than 7.
Yeah, it's happened in 3 or 4 or 5 years. But there have been, I suppose, the reason why, an example recently was, say, the one of David Waldron. So this is the guy who had the massive Darview mansion in Wexford that he spent, considerable amount of money on. But he also had a house in Leixlip. And it turns out between the two properties, he was still getting $6,500 a month in rent, and that was being paid even after they'd been declared the proceeds of crime.
Because he was still appealing, he still had.
No, he had lost the case at this stage, and it was kind of that little gap because a receiver isn't automatically appointed along with the Section 3 proceeds of crime declaration. So they have to go back to court then, for another day out in court to get the receiver appointed, and then have the receiver given the powers to sell. And then there may not be a kind of a pushback from the person who has the property saying, "Can we stay a bit longer?" So that again delays it. So, I mean, that's just one of the anomalies that happened. I mean, you've other kind of strange ones that have, like even last week, like I know it's one of these ones that Sunderworld.com people were clicking on in a big way. It was a fellow called Darren McInerney, and he's, I suppose, a small-time convicted drug dealer from Portlaoise. He's serving a sentence at the minute. But he had €139,000 that was taken off him in 2017.
Yeah.
And he'd sworn a couple of affidavits at the time, but didn't turn up in court.
And swearing an affidavit means he's putting into writing under oath, that's my money.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of the district court or a criminal court of going in and standing in the box and swearing in evidence, but you're doing it verbally. But with high court cases like in this, you do an affidavit, so you swear an affidavit, and it's you do it in front of a witness and it's notarized and, it's an official thing. So it's proper evidence. So, I mean, if you lie in an affidavit, it's perjury as well.
Yeah.
It's the same as if you lie in the witness box. So even though you're not necessarily there physically in court, your affidavit, you're still entering an appearance. And this is the language they use. So Darren McInerney would have entered an appearance way back whenever it was, but the €139,000 was declared the proceeds of crime. He actually, he didn't turn up in court then to support or to kind of push his case, and it was declared that way. So that was just last week then, or 2 weeks ago. The CAB were just rolling this up. This money was still it had been in 3 different bank accounts, and they'd put it into one bank account, and it'd been frozen.
When it's money, yeah. So when it's money and they identify it, say that was that found in cash or was it through bank?
Yeah, it would have been in
originally
different bank accounts.
Okay,
yeah, credit unions.
So they go in usually for a search of a property, or they've identified somebody they believe is living off the proceeds of crime. So they kind of will do their due diligence, they'll do their background, they'll speak to local profilers, etc. They'll build a case that, yes, this looks as if this person who perhaps is on social welfare or something and has 3 Range Rovers sitting outside and is going on all these holidays, that looks suspicious. So they will then go in, conduct a search on the property, and they will take what they see at the time, which could be those cars out the front, could be jewellery, could be handbags, cash,
jet skis,
Rolexes. All sorts of stuff has been caught. And also they will seize during those searches documents which may bring them to bank accounts and to various other properties.
Properties in Lanzarote and stuff like that, yeah.
But say, for example, that was cash, 139,000. From the moment of the search, that cash is put away in an account owned by the state and frozen.
Well, it would still be in. It would still be that person's cash, because there's always the theory that they could somehow win a Supreme Court
claim it back,
claim it back. So it's still their money, but it's frozen. They can't move it. They can't touch it.
Yeah.
They can't do anything with this bank account. And the kind of the final thing then is to have a receiver appointed with power to actually empty the account and send off the money.
And that's the end of that
expenditure, and that's done and dusted then.
But I suppose what I'm getting at, so it's simple with the cash, isn't it? And we've seen with, say, the cars as assets, there often is a case where even though these proceedings might be contested by a defendant, a car is an asset that depletes in value. So there will be orders given by the courts to sell them and to then bank the money.
Yeah.
And freeze that.
And the money is frozen, yeah.
And then the money is the source of the row. But say a property, which is where it becomes, I've often seen cases where it becomes a little bit different in this, because they might have identified a property, for example, the Criminal Assets Bureau, and they've launched a proceeds of crime case, and the property is identified as the asset. But the individual often gets to live on in that property while they're fighting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the eviction is more difficult. Is that why?
Yes. They have the extension of time is there, and sometimes I think there might be a case of sometimes there could be a case for whatever reason it gets delayed, and there can be often good and valid reasons for this, whether or not it's something that's gone to appeal and then that is delayed for whatever reason.
Yeah,
I mean, you had the likes of like Dean Russell, so convicted armed robber, he's part of that. He was part of that gang. Like his brother was shot dead. He was involved in he was alleged to be involved in feuding in Coolock.
Mm-hmm.
His brother Anthony would have been part of Christy Griffin's gang, again another inner city Dubliner involved in a serious gangland feud at the time. Now Dean Russell has said like he's nothing to do with him. He was never involved in that kind of stuff, and he said he'd made his money as a taxi man and all the rest. But he lost his Section 3 order on his house in Riverside Park in Clonshaw in 2014. And and that just went on for years. I mean, they actually didn't get possession until October 22. And then it went for auction initially in 2023. But it wasn't, I don't think it was actually sold until the year after that, and eventually went for 266,000, which was a bit under the.
So was he living in it essentially rent-free all those years?
He was living in it all the time, yeah. I can't say he was living rent-free, but he was certainly still had the use of the house.
But you wouldn't have to pay the mortgage, would you? Or would you? If there was
well, that's the thing. Like, okay, so here was another case that has turned up this recently enough. Is if you remember Patrick Lawler, this is the guy who's convicted of being, the Penguins bagman.
Bagman, yeah.
So the cab were going after a car, cash, and the house they have in Collins Avenue West. And his wife Leona is a respondent in this case as well. And so they were looking for free legal aid this week. Now, he's had a bit of trouble because he's serving time. He's in Shelton Abbey, and so they had to get a production order to get him out. And so he was complaining that he initially couldn't get a lawyer, and it was all slowing things down. So this has been dragging on a little bit. But they did successfully have a legal team in court most recently. And they were looking for free legal aid, which the judge granted. And he gave the reasons that the cab are looking at a period of criminality of I think between 2010 and 2020. Now, he was supposedly making, I think, hundreds of thousands for a couple of days' work a month, and he was moving the cash around. This is a guy with no serious criminal background whatsoever. One of these people, who's facilitating, I suppose, serious gangland. They figured this gang was making 12 million a year. It was mentioned at his trial. So the house was bought with a mortgage in 2007. So there's 3 years where it wasn't criminal money. And then since 2020, his wife Leonie has been paying from her legitimate income, has been paying the mortgage. So as the judge put it, it's a substantial value in the house that isn't proceeds of crime. Now, we haven't heard the details of the case, but the renovations that were put into the house as well are part of this. Now, we'll go into renovations in other cases, like, for instance, Mago Gately, has bought a house for 125,000 and put 440,000 into it. Yeah. So we don't know. We haven't heard the details from Patrick Lawler. There was some mention of it, like his defense is going to be that, well, he did a lot of work himself and he had friends and they were able to get materials cheap, and it was completely overvalued. And this is something that I'd say everybody who has a house that's been renovated that are targeted by CAB will say the valuer is overvalued the work done and you can do it cheaper. And it's a constant argument. And again, it was one that actually delayed the Mago case. And then when they did get the free legal aid surveyor appointed, he came out with a $2,000 difference in what the state had said. Yeah. So, so the Lawlers in their case have won free legal aid to make the argument in court about the value of the house.
And also, so in that case, they could have bought that house back in the 90s, for example. So the case is that this house is, the spend on this house is proving that he had proceeds of crime. He doesn't have, they're going to argue he doesn't have the legitimate income for that. But the actual purchase of the house then, say if we're going back to the 90s when he purchased this house, there would have been maybe a mortgage. He maybe put up 50,000 to buy the house. So that, I presume, also has to be all untangled, where that money came from, that 50,000. And if, for example, a mortgage over 10 years had been paid by legitimate income, but they will have to prove all that, not the Criminal Assets Bureau.
Well, the Criminal Assets Bureau, in saying the Lawler's case, they have a very specific period. They're saying it's 2010 to 2020. So, yeah, obviously, if they can show, look, well, these are all our mortgage payments, and anyway, the Criminal Assets Bureau aren't making us prove that the money used for the purchase and the maintenance of the mortgage in those first 3 years and the subsequent 5 years is from legitimate means. So they don't necessarily have to prove it in that sense, because the case is not against them.
Yes.
And you would have had that if you remember Ross Branding's mother, her Julie Conway, and Chestnut Lodge, and that there would have been a fair proportion of her cash would have gone into doing up the house. And the judge then, when it was sold, it directed that they got back €72,000. So they got back their share of the house that they put in through legitimate means.
It seems overly fair, no?
Well, that Judge Owens regularly uses that phrase. If the justice, if an injustice is not being done to someone. So you would have had, say, for instance, then in Dermot Calvert, who was the Limerick drug dealer, and there was 3 properties they were going after there. But one of them, the main house, now it's small enough, it's a modest enough house, but his daughter was living there with 2 children with serious illness. Yeah. And they basically found a way to max out plus the 7 years so that she could stay there for another 9 years. But when that 9 years is up, I don't know what they'll do then, but
Yeah.
like when the house is sold, it's owned by the Criminal Assets Bureau. It'll revert to the Criminal Assets Bureau.
Right.
So now the other property he was living in and the other derelict, partially done up, partially renovated property, they were taken and sold. So there is ways of, I suppose, trying to ensure that justice is done and an injustice isn't done as well.
And like most cases of, when couples split and it goes to family law, separation agreements are being hammered out in the courts, and 5%, I think, of divorces end up in front of a judge. Like most civil cases, it's better to sit down and talk, isn't it? Because, you're probably going to do a bit better than trudging through the courts, or that would be a lot of the advice. And often that is the case, that a proceeds of crime case will be launched and somebody then will come to the table and say, right, if I pay you this, can I keep my house? Or, if you take the house, can I keep the apartment in Lanzarote? Or whatever. So that's done as well. There's a lot of horse trading done.
Yeah, well, you had one with the O'Brien family who were a burglary gang,
Yeah.
And part of their modus operandi were, like the Cock Walls, they were, doing these kind of reckless, quick, high-speed burglaries in and out and all the rest. But they sent back nearly $1 million Australian dollars. Like one of the sons was named in this, and the dad had bought a lovely plot of land in South County Dublin, and that was seized. And they settled, and we got all the details. And basically, the only thing that property that they got back were the wedding rings, but all the designer goods, all the property were taken, and the cash. And so, I mean, there's settlements.
And people who do work in family law, in particular, will always tell you that, when it gets down to it, people often just have something like that, the wedding rings,
it's enough to
the granny's china, something that will end up causing, if somebody doesn't concede that thing, which is probably of only value to one person, that it'll end up causing it to go all the way into court. Well,
the only thing is, if you're fighting a cab case, unlike a divorce, well, just like a divorce, you don't get free legal aid.
No.
Like, so, I mean, it's a matter of, like, you're going to have to settle or just ignore the case and let them take it.
And the free legal aid comes in it depends, I think, largely on the judge's concerns. Some of them would have been known in the past to be very against the free legal aid and to refuse it. Some of them, like Justice Alexander Owens, I think is probably a little bit more givish with the free legal aid. Now, he always gives a valid argument for why he's giving it, but he has a tendency.
Well, it's very specific. I mean, like the legislation, it's not automatic that get free legal aid. You have to apply for it. And it's usually only in cases then when it's a family home, like if it's one of your jet skis or a BMW or whatever it is, or your 10 Rolexes, you're not going to get free legal aid for that. And he dismisses that almost out of hand.
Well, what if you're unemployed anyway and you're on social welfare and, okay, you're arguing that all the rest of this lifestyle
But they all are unemployed and on social welfare or have no legitimate income.
So do they not get free legal aid then?
No, and they don't. And I think, I suppose there's a certain kind of certain level of criminal who's quite surprised by this, I think, when they turn up in court and they haven't been able to get their regular solicitor to go near it, because it's a high court. It's going to be expensive day out if the solicitor is hiring counsel to go in front of the judge. So, I mean... So
they're getting the free legal aid largely, you think, because the family home is involved in the proceedings?
It's only really because if there's a family home or if there is the prospect of an injustice being done. Okay. And so they're very protective of making sure that justice is always served, and not just justice on behalf of the Criminal Assets Bureau, but also on the people I think that are being targeted by CAB. I'm sure the judiciary are aware that this is fairly draconian legislation, and no more than the Special Criminal Court. Compared to the rest of the way things work, it does seem it's a draconian measure that was taken for good reasons, and in both cases probably for the same reason, that just the level of fear and I suppose the difficulty in dealing with serious gangland figures is that you need, for instance, in the Special Criminal Court, a juryless court, and then you need the criminals to prove that they have the means, that they were that they came from legitimate means, when the dogs on the street, who unfortunately can't give evidence, when they know that this money didn't come from honest work.
So what kind of money are we talking about? Because we talk about quite a lot of the cases because they're very interesting that come up and that you cover. But what kind of money in general are they talking about? How much would the Criminal Assets Bureau be making for the state? Or what did, for example, Justice Jim O'Callaghan, he talked about, 1.7 billion, was it, or something that the cost of the economy?
This is the value. The value of crime. So that 1.7 billion presumably is going to criminal gangs. That's the way it was described. So that's, you're not talking about just the cost of crime to the country as well. So I mean, that would be higher than that. So I mean, it's a bit less than the European average, but it is a huge amount of cash when you think about it. 1.7 billion.
It sure is. Like, I'm just how many zeros after that, and
I mean, like the CAB aren't doing all this by themselves, but the budget that they have, while it's increasing, and there are talk about there has been. Previous ministers talking about doubling the size of CAB and, making it 4 times as big. So their budget has gone from 11.2 million in 2003 to 12.75 million in 25.
Well, so that's not that much of a jump, is it?
It's not that much, but it's growing, and I'm sure they'd argue for more. And I'd say the more bodies, the more cases, that they would be able to bring. And the numbers are going up. I think there's 40% more cases last year than there was the previous year. Now there can be, you could have had a slowdown over COVID. You're not sure, but and there is a real definite kind of. Say the difference between the likes of, say, Ross Browning and, the case against him that was worth well over €1 million worth in assets, and the fact that he was the Kinnan cartel's number one man in Ireland. And then you have a burglar that no one outside of his county really or family have even heard of, and they're taking a BMW worth 18 grand off him. Mm-hmm. So you have those cases running side by side with the same
and they're really important for the communities, aren't they? For the smaller communities out there. And I think that would be the ethos of the Criminal Assets Bureau. So for our, say, 12 million spend as a state, what do we get back from CAB? What do they pull in as such?
In one way, it's hard to judge, right? So because, say, since 1996, it's been about just under, say, 220 million. So like kind of a year average. So in 2023, they would have brought in 8.6 million. So you'd say, well, there's a loss of on their budget of 8.2, but at the same time they had social welfare savings of 3.3 million as well. And then of course we were talking before we came on about the big one. If it ever comes through, will totally wipe out, explode their success, and that's the Clifton Collins, the cannabis grow farm man who forgot his code for his Bitcoin wallets, which have now grown to be worth 350 million.
So they are in the possession of the Criminal Assets Bureau, essentially the state, and he actually didn't only forget his code, he did write it down, and he wrapped it up and he shoved it into a fishing rod, and the fishing rod was thrown out with the rubbish from the house that he had been renting, and they followed the trail for this little piece of paper with the code on it to the skip, and it had all been sent to China to be incinerated. But anyway, so that's where the code has gone. But there was a hope, and always was, from the minute the Criminal Assets Bureau, and I think actually Clifton Collins didn't contest that case, but there was always a hope that developments in technology would mean that somebody would work out how to unlock these crypto wallets where this Bitcoin is stored away. It's continued to grow in value, though.
Yeah, it was 53 million when it was seized, and it's 350 million now.
So this is like the Criminal Assets Bureau Bureau's Apple windfall.
Well, it's a piggy bank. Now, they've lost the key, or they can't remember where it is in the house, but it's certainly there. And and I'm sure there's plenty of tech companies around the world that will say, well, look, give us the wallets and we'll give you 150 million now, on the basis that they might be able to do it. Now, I don't know if the legislation might prevent them from doing that. Yeah. Like, if it ever does turn up, it'll double what they've done since day one.
You'd imagine it's bound to at some point, or that, AI technology or something will work out how to undo this lock. Everything.
But the problem is, once AI can unlock Bitcoin wallets, they'll probably become worthless then.
Okay, see, I've wandered into territory there that I'm not that confident of. I'll just accept that. But one way or another, we'll say that's the savings account.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's fun. It's a funny one, isn't it? Like, it's like there's a lock safe that they know is full of money and they can't get it, but at least no one else has it. So, they've done the job in terms of depriving someone of the benefits of their crime.
And you talk about the year of the loss. I mean, there's been many reports out over the years when they've pulled in 20 million, or they're able to report that.
Course,
so it goes up and down, and it depends on where the cases are at. And of course, they can get really lucky some years, the likes of going into searches and finding sort of those cash reserves, depending on when they do the searches. Also where the house market is, because we've covered over the last year and before the sales of properties, and they do eventually end up going for auction, and the sales of all those designer goods, because they do end up all being sold on the open market. And some of the properties, some months you can see, certainly this year, there's been a good few months we've seen that there's been like 4 or 5 properties and lands, etc., up for sale.
Yeah, I think I did quick calculation, and there was about 5 million worth of property in a 12-month period sold, which on the base of it sounds good, but if you were running an estate agent office, you wouldn't really be making great money, like on your 1% or whatever.
No,
you want to be doing 4 or 5 times that if you had a couple of employees as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, they've had some good results. I mean, the likes of Stephen Saunders' house in Cluny. Now, again, that was one that was dragged out as well. It went through appeal. I mean, it was declared the proceeds of crime in October 2022. And in May 25, it was sold and went for 573. So that was actually, a competitive price. I suppose it's in an area where there's a huge demand. I mean, you look at the likes of Niall Smith, say, he was the guy who was the Burn Gang's cannabis farmer. And there was one property he put, hundreds of thousands into, and it went for a fraction of what he sold, of what was put into it. And this is up in Leitrim in the middle of nowhere. At best, it was going to be an Airbnb location for, fishermen or, people who are on a fishing holiday in that neck of the woods. That'd be possibly your only way of making your money back. So, I mean, it's kind of initial value. I mean, he bought these places like for 15 and 20,000 euro and then put hundreds of thousands in one of them. Like, really.
And to go back to what they were talking about in the Dáil, it's to make all of this more efficient, basically. So to reduce the time and presumably make it less, trudging in the courts.
Yeah. I mean, you see kind of even the idea that, once a Section 3 order is made, you hear that if once a Section 3 is made, if it follows then that automatically there is a receiver appointed, that prevents another day back in court.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that saves a month at least, if not longer.
Yeah. So going forward into the summer period and beyond, these cases, because they're in the High Court, are just going to proceed. There isn't even a summer break.
Well, the actual cab list generally takes a break, all right? I mean, they all do. Like there may be kind of pressing Section 2s, but we're not allowed to go into those anyway. Mm-hmm. And they're the kind of like the ex parte where they go in and they look for permission to freeze accounts or seize or to hold on to assets. And then this is before the actual proceeds of crime case actually starts, when they put their affidavits together. The person who owns the property gets them and they make the reply with their affidavit. So you won't see them probably again until September. But there is another, I think there's another court list later this month, and then that'll be the last of it then until October.
But I mean, before we came on, you were just quipping that they kind of talk about reviewing these Proceeds of Crime Acts all the time in the Dáil. I mean, these make headlines probably in the summer months when there's not that much news about. It's probably a good time to discuss reviewing the likes of the Proceeds of Crime Act, because you're sure to get front page on that. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at those figures you gave from the beginning about the budget, it isn't really growing, or is it? I mean,
well, it's gone
from when?
Well, I suppose it's 1.5 million over 2 years.
Over 2 years?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when I say 3 years, to say in 2023 it was 11.2, the following year it was 11.93, and then it was 12.75 in 25. So that was a bit of a leap, all right.
I thought you were talking to quite a while back to when.
No, that's the current. Yeah.
That's the current, yeah. So, and they are hopefully, if Justice Jim O'Callaghan sort of does what he says, they will be expanding, bringing in more personnel who are not just Gardaí, they're also accountants, revenue.
Yeah, it's a joint agency approach. Like, I suppose it's the best way to do it. Yeah. So yeah, you have your customs, your revenue, social welfare is a big part of it as well, because so many people are still claiming back, and they end up getting social welfare demands against them as well to pay back hundreds of thousands of euro.
And obviously then the other major thing they do is train up profilers around the country. They're their eyes and ears, they say.
Yeah. And we saw, and even the O'Brien case I mentioned, but the burglar sending their cash back from Australia, that would have been a local cab profiler that would have spotted that, I suppose, a suspicious kind of sale of a plot of land.
You talk to the lads in cab and they'll always say to you that most of the cases, or certainly a lot of them, come in on a phone call from a nosy neighbour.
Yeah.
Huh?
The nosy neighbours.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
I know. We get a few of those ourselves.
Yeah. Probably a majority of our stories come in from a nosy neighbour as well, if the truth be told. Okay, well look, thanks for that.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.